Tonight, we're talking anger, grief, violence, and redemption, and setting it all to some great music. Join us on the Film Swap podcast.
Here is a motion picture film.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrill.
Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host, a man, when he talks about film, it sounds like sweet music. He's the ecstatic gaucho himself, Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jono, how are you?
Not bad. Thank you very much. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. And we've got a special guest today who's joined us all the way from New York City in the United States, who's come to talk to us today about Harmony and Havoc, great film scores. His name is William Remmers. He's the director of the Utopia Opera Company in New York. And Will, you also run a company over here in the United Kingdom as well.
Yes, I'm the music director and sort of second hand of a company directed by my friend Rachel called Forbear Theatre, which operates out of London and tours Gilbert and Sullivan throughout the UK.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. And you just finished a production of The Mikado in New York, is that right?
Yes, we did our fantasy set production in the UK from May through August, and then took the UK cast to New York to be able to do it here for this audience, which was a wonderful treat.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Like great fun.
Yeah.
So today we've asked you to join, and thank you for coming by, because we are talking a little bit about music and how important music is in films. And we wanted to talk about some great film scores and great film composers. So we thought you were the absolute best person we could possibly think of to come and talk to about music in film. So we've picked a couple of really great films to talk about tonight. And I think what I'll do is I'll hand over to you, William, just for a moment, just to briefly introduce Hana-Bi, which we're going to talk about in the second half of the show.
Sure. The film Hana-Bi is a major film by Takeshi Kitano that stands in a long line of his 90s run and acts as sort of like the meditative / violent apex of concurrent styles he had been working with. He has one outright comedy just before this, 2 films before this, but he has an elegiac strain of films that line up with a sensibility around gangster topics, crime topics, and even in those, I mean, there are these incredibly slow, briefly punctuated by violent films, and the scores are invariably by Joe Hisaishi, who is very well known for his scores with Kitano and also for Hayao Miyazaki's Studio Ghibli films. And this score for Hana-Bi stuck with me since I was a teenager, and it came as if from a dream when you asked me to suggest a film, because I didn't know where to go, and I was thinking of like, who are my usual suspects, and I was thinking a lot of old Hollywood, I think. But I then watched Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, and then I saw an actor in that, Ren Osugi, and I went, I haven't seen Ren in a while. Wait, he's in Hana-Bi as a major role in Hana-Bi. That's the film I should suggest. Like it came all of a sudden, and then I watched that film in a double feature, unplanned that evening, and went, yeah, this is the score that I wanted to get into.
Well, it is a really great film. I was really happy to revisit again, and I'm looking forward to digging in and having a little chat about it in the second half of the show. But Jonathan, you and I selected a film that does cover the old Hollywood style. And we talked. We picked one of the great classics from the golden age of Hollywood. And shall I let you introduce it, Jonathan?
Yes, our film is The Sea Wolf, made in 1941, released in 1941, directed by the great Michael Curtiz. It stars Edward G. Robinson and Ida Lupino and John Garfield and Alexander Knox, and basically sort of big names from cinema at the time. And Michael Curtiz he's one of the sort of the greats from the sort of golden era of Hollywood. And this film has one of the great sort of soundtracks. And I have to say, you sort of really chose it more than me, but he is sort of like he's a colossus in sort of original soundtracks. Erich Wolfgang Korngold.
Yes. He's a personal favorite of mine, and I think when we were discussing the topic and discussing the films to cover, I kind of, in the back of my head, automatically I wanted to talk about Korngold and one of his films. And we could have picked one of the obvious ones, one of the great Errol Flynn swashbucklers. He did Adventures of Robin Hood and Captain Blood, which is one of my absolute all-time favorite films, and the Seahawk, and many others. And he's just an absolutely amazing composer. He came from a background of he was like a classical music composer and a conductor. And I guess when he moved over to the States, he got into film scoring, presumably because it was lucrative and it helped him to establish himself in America. And he has done some of the all-time great classic scores. And I must confess up front, I'm not really a soundtrack guy. I don't really listen to a lot of film soundtracks and things like that usually, but this is one of the guys that I do. He's kind of a go-to because many of his soundtracks, actually, you can just listen to them as great pieces of music. So I have quite a few recordings of his music, and I love him to bits. So when we were talking about the films, we did kind of a short list, and in the end, I thought The Seawolf is a really great movie, but it's not quite as well known and sort of talked about in the same breath as with the Errol Flynn films and things like that. So I thought, and plus the score is a little bit different, as it's not quite so bombastic and rousing, and although there are bits of it that are, but it's also very subdued at times and very, I think, psychological, and it really gets to grips with what's going on the ship in this story. So I thought it made a really good choice as a film that's slightly off the beaten track a little bit that we could talk about and draw some attention to. So I don't know, shall we, just for listeners who might not be familiar with the film, shall we just give them a really, really brief, concise introduction?
Will, would you like to tell us about The Seawolf?
I'd love to. And I was so happy with this choice, because then I was thinking, I wonder where you're going to go with what you're going to pick. And I even tried to predict what kind of composers would come your way. And I couldn't, out of all my list, I couldn't have been more overjoyed that you picked Korngold, because he's a huge favorite of mine. His run with Warner Brothers in this period is unstoppable. And yeah, there's incredible things to be found. Another one I can recommend is a film called Another Dawn, which you can listen to that soundtrack on its own, and it's like the best part of the movie. He arrived doing Midsummer Night's Dream, adapting Mendelssohn's music for Warner Brothers, and that's my favorite Hollywood film, bar none. And so, his orchestration touch is definitely influenced by his experiences. I've been trying to produce one of his early one-act operas for a decade, but it's very hard to get get access to the materials for it, and of course, it requires a hefty orchestra. As you can imagine, he's somebody that was dealing in orchestral forces quite considerably frequently. And this particular film is one I had not seen, and was grateful to get it suggested. I had seen an earlier film about 10 years earlier at MoMA adapted from Jack London's novel, The Seawolf. And so, having not read the novel, but having seen 2 films of it, I did a little more research into what this novel is. And if anyone is familiar with that source material coming in, this is not exactly the same sort of plot in a way, because it's got quite a larger principal cast than the novel has, less streamlined, but in a way that makes it even more idiosyncratic and beguiling. In this film, there are a number of individuals who all end up on one horrible boat called the Ghost, which this boat is run by Edward G. Robinson as Wolf Larsen, who is a baddie so well known from the novel that contemporaneous reviews would have been referring to his stature as Wolf Larsen and how it would have compared to previous versions. And he's a strangely philosophical, self-obsessed psychopath ship's captain who has, through various methods of coercion and shanghaiing sailors, and got this motley crew to go on a sailing mission to get seals, but they're not actually there to get seals. He's there to steal seal pelts and skins from his brother, Death Larsen. So that is that. First of all, that's awesome. That's just a great, so awesome. A great setup. And on this boat arrive a few folks who all end up meeting together. One is Ida Lupino's convict, and one is John Garfield's convict, and they've both ended up on this boat through one. Garfield chose an unlikely choice for anybody, but chose to join this ship in order to escape the police. And Ida Lupino and Alexander Knox ended up shipwrecked, and both ended up on this boat. She's a convict, and Alexander Knox is a writer. He's in some ways sort of a London surrogate that you can imagine. It's his perspective of, well, I'm on this boat, I'm going to write about what happens. But of course, he can't return home anytime soon and is forced to work on the ship as well. Amongst this crew also is we've got Gene Lockhart's doctor, who's drunk, who doesn't have a single ability left in his bones, but in managing to nurse Ida Lupino back to health, regained some of his former dignity. And he's also a fascinating character. And Barry Fitzgerald's Cookie, who is another strange psychopath, who is the ship's cook, and who manages to be a sort of subordinate antagonist to everybody on the ship. We've got power imbalance with regards the higher first mates and crew members who act as sort of like an officer's retinue that support Wolf Larsen, and then the actual ship mates, the folks who have the lower class jobs on the ship, who manage to stay below decks, and an intense feeling of mutiny starts to develop against Wolf Larsen's violent tactics, which does lead to death and injury repeatedly for the folks on the Ghost, which allows it to fulfill its reputation as a ship you never want to go on. And from there, the various characters successfully compete for our attention, because there's so many threads to follow in this film, and the intense stack of character actors and leading players that manage to populate this ship make it an incredibly rich experience, made all the more rich by Korngold's like sensitive scoring of it, which whenever you have a Korngold score, you sit up and you stand to attention, because you go, this isn't an ordinary Hollywood film score. There's somebody operating here on a slightly alternate level that casts a spell, and that spell never felt more great to me than in the reveal, the kind of multiple reveal of boats. The model work here, I know Byron Haskins, one of the credited special effects people. Robert Rawson's credited with the screenplay. You've got film directors on the staff of the film, and you've got the musical crew. It also includes Leo Forbstein as music director, who is Warner Brothers' go-to guy, and Hugo Friedhofer and Ray Heindorf, who have also scored a number of films across the decades as musical support, probably helping with orchestrations and things. So like the amount of Warner Brothers talent going into this film and creating its own unique atmosphere was quite unsurpassed, and I was thrilled every second. So hopefully that's a good overview, a brief overview of the merits and plot of the Seawolf.
Well, no, that was excellent. That was absolutely excellent. And Yeah, this was the first time I'd watched it in many years. I got the Warner Archive Blu-ray, not that when it came out, basically, but it's been sitting on my shelf. So this was a great opportunity to crack it open. Edward G. Robertson's character, Wolf Larson, is just an extraordinary man because he's somebody he's the ultimate kind of bully and sadistic and cruel. But he also, as the film ultimately reveals, he's also an intellectual. And he sits and he reads at night. He has all the great classics of literature in his library. And he very much rationalizes and intellectualizes his brutality and his viciousness, and he hints at a history, a life of great hard knocks, where he's developed this need to create his own little environment on this boat, in which he can be the tyrant. So perhaps someone who was possibly uh, under tyrants many times in his life, and now he's created his own little insulated tyranny on this boat, and he's quite an extraordinary character. Jono, was this your first time watching it?
Yes, it was my first time watching it. I really enjoyed it. I really like boats, films set on boats, apart from anything else. And I also like films where you're sort of stuck in a world which you can't get out of, like a sort of cabin or whatever it is, a spaceship or something. I suppose spaceships are boats, really, in a way. Yeah, the characters, yeah, so many, as you said, Will, so many rich characters in it, so eccentric people, and yeah, terrific. Yeah, Wolf Larson. Well, it turns out he's got his own Wikipedia page separate from the novel because he's such a sort of well, rich character, and loved it. And yeah, the music was really. I guess one of the things I noticed was when he has his headaches, because he's sort of plagued by these sort of migraines or something. He has a sort of special motif, which I thought was really beautiful and striking. And yeah, it was a terrific movie.
The music really kind of humanizes him in a way, because he
Yes.
could quite easily sort of degenerate into this kind of cartoon baddie, and you could draw a lot of parallels with him and sort of Captain Bligh in the Mutiny on the Bounty, and
Mm.
certainly the Charles Lawton version. But the music very much kind of gives you a bit of that inner space with him, and it sort of humanizes him in a way, doesn't it? Would
Yeah.
you say, well, what are some of the, because you're obviously familiar with some of the other Michael Curtiz films of that period, which many were scored by Erich Wolfgang Korngold. How would you say this differs? Because I think this one is a lot different from, say, the Sea Wolf or Captain Blood, which are much more rousing and exciting and befitting the source material. But this one has a lot of kind of more calmer and subdued moments, and spends a lot of time sort of building suspense in a different way, and has our kind of resident music expert tonight. Could you kind of help us to understand a little bit about how this score sort of accentuates the kind
Mm.
of the inner life, if you will, of the characters and the situations that they find themselves in?
Yes, I can. You're right in the contrast with those more rousing scores. You could think of the main titles of Robin Hood as like a very particular type of, like, it's almost the type of moment where Korngold knows that he's playing, I wouldn't say in cartoon dimensions, but in a heightened technicolor, vivid, heroic storybook kind of energy. He manages to write cues like that opening title for Robin Hood that you could hear the dopey version of it by a lesser composer, and the way that he kind of amps it up, or just following this, like the famous King's Row theme, which was aped for Star Wars, is another one of these things that it's like it's fallen from the heavens. It's such a very clear, pure idea. In this film, the musical motifs are much more kind of ambiguous and gooey and mysterious, and in a way have more of a more of the energy of a suspense or horror atmosphere. A film that I thought of in a favorable comparison, which I really love, is a film called The Ghost Ship, with Richard Dix, which I believe was RKO, and maybe just within the decade following, of an unpleasant ship captain and some odd goings on a ship at a much lower budget, but that has like a horror film atmosphere. And I was mentioning that the model shot. There's this incredible moment where when you first cut away from the little rowboat to the model of the rowboat with the little dolls sitting inside it, and again, that's just struck me as a Byron Haskin moment, thinking forward to War of the Worlds and special effects wizardry, and I was so convinced by those little dolls, which then you've got this, like, there's always a bigger fish moment with a series of boats. There is the boat with Ida Lupino and Alexander Knox, and then there's just this one giant boat that only exists to wreck that boat. And then, of course, the Ghost, which seems like a pirate ship that comes through the fog, like a ghost, like from it is the ship wandering and rarely ever docks anywhere. That it has to, because Wolf Larsen cannot touch land, or else he's lost his fiefdom. He can't separate himself from that construct he's created, which is why he has to have the fate that he does. But in that moment, that extended sequence of model shots that develop to kind of introduce these sharks in the water that collide with each other in various fateful ways. It had the bubbling, ambiguous undercurrent of modernistic suspense music in a way that I don't always hear him do. I mentioned Another Dawn as another comparison point. That's a good example of him in his melodramatic romantic mode, which he does get into in almost every film, because they all have those dimensions, but it isn't a film with the same kind of rousing tone. There are opportunities for him to live in that aspect. There is a bit of diegetic play with the ship mate who plays the harmonica becoming a sort of romantic theme, but a quite uncannily eerie one. I think that this film is ultimately so tragic, and particularly because of the way that they've split the protagonist into two characters, which means you have to lose one of them. And it then makes like an operatic dimension to what becomes the love story, which almost exists in a primordial way and not a logical way. It's like, well, these people have to get together, and we have to. I mean, I had to think back to the other version of the film a bit, which only has one protagonist, which I'm discussing. Garfield and Knox really are one character in most tellings of the Seawolf, but I was thinking that this version, the Warner Brothers 1941 version, I was thinking of the poster and knowing who was going to be in it, expecting it would be a film about John Garfield and Edward G. Robinson at butting heads the whole picture, which could have been draining. But by the fact that it manages to like give you, by sort of spreading the wealth a little bit of the emotional content, it allows for these different dimensions for Korngold to play and to feel even more ambiguous, which is in its way more human and real, versus the unambiguity of heroism that you would find in an Errol Flynn Korngold movie, where it's very clear. Like Humphrey, who's the Alexander Knox character, is a character that we can treat very suspiciously. There are ways in which he's set up to be a romantic interest, but only just slightly. And there are ways in which we don't trust him, because we know that his very opening move in the piece is to not help Ida Lupino escape the police, is to choose to say, I have to follow the law. And especially as a modern day audience, like it's sort of police behavior that we're like, oh, I kind of stresses you out. Like, you don't want to respect the rat in a Warner Brothers film of any kind.
He's different from a lot of most of the characters in the film, as well, as that it's implied he comes from wealth, and that he's more sort of aristocratic, if you will. He's a wealthy, presumably successful writer, and he's very cultured and comes from that sort of background, whereas all the other characters obviously come from a more sort of working class, or even lower in some cases, people who are at rock bottom socially and emotionally as well. So he very much is in contrast to a lot of the other characters in the piece, isn't he?
Hmm.
Absolutely.
And John Garfield's quite interesting because they do set him up as like he's a bit of a firebrand, and he's someone who's going to stand up to the man, and he's going to hold his own, but he actually doesn't. And a lot of the throughout the film, he's very flawed, and he sometimes. I mean, Edward G. Robertson gives him a good hiding, and he ends up a lot of the time down in the bottom of the ship, all beaten up and bloodied and bruised, and sort of subdued, and so he doesn't really meet the expectations of the audience in that way either, does he?
No, it's the way in which, I mean, it's almost a virtue of the allotted runtime that either of those characters get to maintain. That the butting heads version, where Garfield would have had to have had like those closed door scenes with him, might have been slightly less effective. There are ways in which Garfield in this film has like a slightly, I don't want to say unintentionally comedic energy, but there's something like funny about his directness, and the fact that he isn't that complex. He is somebody who's going to be like he's biding his time. He's planning carefully, and he's thinking ahead, but he's still brusque in his way. And there are a few deliveries, particularly with him in the Ida Lupino scenes. I have this slight feeling, and I wonder what it'll feel like when I see it again, that Korngold didn't have as convincing a read on the romantic scene, like that first introduces them as a plot. There were two moments of the film where Korngold didn't convince me, but I would never say that is an objective metric. It's more a first watch. And the other would be Lockhart's ascent up to the top, up where he's going to meet his final scene. And there's a bit of Mickey Mousing that I didn't expect Korngold to have as the men are chasing him up the ropes, that I think that there could have been a more subtle approach, but I also can imagine that it could have been one of the assistants that helped and then managed to, fill in that information.
You use the phrase Mickey Mousing, and would it be, just for people who might not be familiar with that term, could you just explain what that means?
Yes, it's a term that I think that I began to understand very clearly through an excellent podcast called Settling the Score, which if you don't have this one on your radar, anybody listening should go to Settling the Score and just find a film discussed that they like and watch it. But they discuss Mickey Mousing, especially unsurprisingly on the Snow White, which was it was tempting for me to choose something like that in this because of just how wonderful those Disney scores can be. But Mickey Mousing would be when the composer, like in a Mickey Mouse cartoon, accentuates the visual image almost to an obsessive degree by matching beat for beat what is happening. The character smacks someone on the head and there's a big smack. The waves come in and there's a big crescendo. And sometimes this can feel like a doubling effect that is unnecessary when maybe perhaps working in an alternate rhythm, maybe a more ambiguous rhythm against such rhythmically clear visual action is the more subtle approach. So you can sort of see that there are times in a film where you'll go like, it's laying it on a little thick. And composers of Korngold's stature don't tend to ever really lay it on so thick, in my opinion, because they want to. I can feel Korngold's always treating every film score he does as seriously as he would treat one of his orchestral works. But I can also appreciate that the constraints of Hollywood filmmaking may have made it that he didn't always get his first or best choice. I don't know if either of you have heard his piano demos of any of his scores.
No.
But there are a number of them, I believe, on the Robin Hood Blu-ray, where it's him like playing out what the score will be. And it sounds like he has 10 hands. He's an incredible pianist. And these fully fleshed pieces of material seem to come to him. I don't know if some of the films had a tighter schedule than others, and there's no way in which I would say this is lesser. It was maybe 20 seconds of the film where I went, there could have been a second take at that, and I don't know what it was, but it doesn't diminish my appreciation for the film any, I think, to have that kind of thing. But it was an observation, I suppose.
Interesting.
Sorry,
Well,
go
I
ahead,
guess
John.
the funny thing about the Dr. Prescott, Gene Lockhart's character, is that he's quite was a comic character, and there's not a lot of comedy in the film, really, is there? But at the same time, he's sort of an alcoholic. He's a sort of victim of this tyrant, and it's a sort of slightly incongruous. Now we look at it and say, well, why are we laughing at this guy? And as you say, well, as he's climbing up the rigging, I can't actually remember the music. It's quite sort of jaunty, sort of music as he scales the rigging. And he's like, yeah, this is odd. But I guess maybe that's just because it was we're looking back at it from almost a century or 80 years, and it all made sense to people back then. I'm not sure.
He's someone who's quite interesting because I think, William, you alluded at the beginning to the fact that he's a character who reasserts his dignity or finds his dignity and his confidence again towards the end. And obviously, for people who haven't seen the film, we don't want to spoil what happens, but he has a very interesting arc in the film, as does the cook, who's just this incredibly nasty piece of work. But as the film progresses, he has his own little arc of how he sort of gets his comeuppance, if you will. And I think that there's lots of really terrific sort of moments in this film that are great. And the score really subtly underscores that all the time. And I think it's beautiful. I was actually just listening to it today. I have two different recordings. I have one recording that's actually the actual film music as it was used in the film. And then I have a separate sort of more modern recording of it. I've really enjoyed listening to this week and really analyzing it and how it brings in those different moods and those different moments so subtly. And it still has its big dramatic moments as well. But it's really beautiful. And I'd encourage people to go and just find a CD or, I guess nowadays go on, Spotify or whatever and listen to it because it's a terrific score. Was there anything else you guys wanted to say? Because I'm just conscious, Will, you're on kind of a bit of a tight schedule today, and we want to leave enough time to be able to talk about our second film. So I just wanted to leave it open if there's any other points that you wanted to make specifically about The Seawolf.
I think that it's a strong recommendation, it sounds like, from all of us here, for anybody that hasn't seen it, that it is a highly compelling film. And I think I'm with Jono here that films set on boats do me in great. Like I'd love when I saw Barry Fitzgerald was in this, I'm like, all right, Long Voyage Home, let's do it. And then I'm like, no, he's a piece of work in this one. Never mind. Like it was sort of fun to see that kind of character actor like giving such a different type of role than you see in other pictures where he can be likable. But that if this is something that you may see it on TCM come by, don't give it two looks, just watch it. I think it will reward any viewer. It's a very psychologically compelling film, and Korngold and the performances and Rawson's script, everything about it adds up to something that I think is of a higher intellectual caliber than a number of other Warner Brothers films at the time could have been. And it's great to see Curtiz on a high, and whenever he's not doing Confederacy apology westerns, I am very pleased. So that's sort of where I'm at with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. John, was there any last thoughts you wanted to say about The Seawolf?
No, it's a good film. Go and watch it.
Brilliant. Well, I concur. I love this film. I think it's terrific. Because like William says, I think it's a really rip-roaring high seas adventure, but it's got a little bit more subtlety and depth and sort of, very interesting character study And I think it's a terrific film, really entertaining, and just a really lovely score. So by all means, folks, go and check it out. We are going to take a very, very sorry, I'll try that again. Not a beef break. I don't think anyone has time to eat a dinner, but we're going to take a brief break, and we're going to come right back to talk about a very different type of score, kind of, in some ways, kind of a polar opposite, but maybe not. But definitely very much different, because we're going to be talking about Hana-Bi, and we're going to talk about it in just a minute. So, folks, stay tuned.
Hey film nerds, Film Swap is now on Letterboxd. It's where you'll find capsule reviews for every film we've covered on the show, plus themed lists based on each of our episodes, and our essential cinema list featuring the films we think are absolute must-sees. You can explore the themes and dive deeper and even drop your own swaps and suggestions in the comments. Got a perfect pick for one of our themes? Tell us. Follow Film Swap on Letterboxd, hit us with your hot takes and submit your swaps. It's like Criterion Closet, except only more chaotic. Just look for Film Swap Podcast on Letterboxd or use this handy-dandy QR code. There's also a link in the comments. Hidden gems, forgotten classics. Follow Film Swap on Letterboxd and let's get nerdy.
And we're back. Listeners, welcome back, and welcome back, Jono, and our special guest, William Remmers from New York City, who's here to talk to us about great film scores. So, William, you suggested today for your swap a really terrific Japanese film from 1997 called Hana-Bi by the great Beat Takeshi, a real favorite of mine. I love his films from this period. And this is a really lovely film about a policeman who's wallowing in guilt, frustration. Would that be fair to say? And
Yes.
At a crossroads in his life, and it's kind of it's a very odd path to redemption. Is that a fair way of saying what the film is about?
I think so. It's much harder to give a clearer synopsis to a Kitano film, but it's because, like many of his inspirations, it may be the type of film that not much happens in, or that is, because it is meditative, elegiac, as I said before, a synopsis almost doesn't always cover the juice of what makes the film interesting, versus a Seawolf, where just describing a character's situation can give you a lot. Here, there is a lot to go off of, at least in terms of, like, there are inciting incidents that are delivered to us non-chronologically, that give you a bit of a context of, this is what the narrative is. Like, the principal characters are reacting to this specific trauma, but in presenting it non-chronologically, it removes like a direct kind of causality from the viewer's experience that I think allows it to be much more about investing yourself in the tone and performances, which is aided in huge ways by the music. So that the music is carrying you in a very specific way. And Joe Hisaishi was, again, I was racking my brain who to pick for this. Was it going to be an obvious choice like a Philip Glass or a Bernard Herrmann or Korngold? And this came to me again in my hour of need. And I went, oh my goodness, I listened to the soundtrack of Hana-Bi over and over and over and over when I was a teenager, and had only seen the film once. And still, this is only my second time seeing it in all that time. But it was the sort of thing where I remember the movie so well and would always rate it among great films that I adore, just because the music would transport me back to the energy of the movie. And it's not dissimilar to other Kitano films, particularly of this era. I would say that the lead up to this is Violent Cop, Boiling Point, and Sonatine are kind of the antecedents that feel the most like this. But he also has films like A Scene at the Sea, which are before this as well, which, you can feel the energy. I mean, he'll take any excuse to get characters on a beach. and reckon with the open ocean in front of them. So so in this context, the general inciting character, and I was looking at the cast list a moment ago to see if I could remember the characters' names, and it almost doesn't matter too much because they don't say the names all too often.
Mm.
But that's sort of real. I really appreciate sometimes when a movie doesn't go out of its way to name the characters over and over. It's almost like the lead character, his wife, his fellow detective. But yes, you can imagine after a disastrous attempt at capturing a fugitive that led to death and injury among his various friends, and then an unrelated, seemingly parallel event that is delivered to us that leads to the paralyzation of his friend, played by Ren Osugi, who is sort of like our parallel protagonist in a way. It's like another character who's facing injury and trauma. Kitano is someone who knows much about this. Kitano, who had attempted suicide and has a similar arc to Kurosawa in that respect, who was a great admirer they admired each other greatly. That's the film is really about trauma and dealing with it. But on top of all of that pain, Kitano's wife in the film, that character is deathly ill, though it's not really clear that she manages to have a brave face, but at some point she will be expiring, and all of his fellow detectives are well aware of it. It seems that he has basically taken himself out of commission and also seems to owe a significant amount of money to the Yakuza. There's a lot going on for a film with not a lot going on.
Yes, exactly.
But that's I would say that the basic overview of the major narrative elements that shape and contribute to the tonal ballet that then becomes Kitano's alternating expressions of meditative grief, sharp bursts of comedy, and sharp bursts of violence that come in almost interchangeably and out of nowhere. And there's really I could watch Kitano direct himself as the lead in anything any day, because his own performance, which centers the film, as always, is equally mysterious as it is beguiling and entrancing. But in this particular film, I think because though he's playing another violent cop, it's one of his more consistently noble protagonists that he's played, whereas other times when he's a straight up Yakuza or like an actively he's such a he could beat up anybody. It's basically he has the strength to beat up anybody, but maybe this film skips past miscarriages of justice that he may have participated in, the way that you see in other cop films that he's had before. So
yes. You could almost understand that probably has gone on, but at the same time, yeah, they don't really dwell on it here. Most of his outbursts of violence, I guess you could almost say they're understandable, and they're reactionary very much to the moment. He's very much an impulsive personality, isn't he? He hardly says anything in the film, does he? I'm not even sure he has 5 actual lines of dialogue in the entire film. But him here, it's the silences that have the most impact. The film is very silent. It's almost a silent movie. And the use of the music is all the more sort of powerful because of those silences and those quiet moments. So the music really brings out that inner life of, even in those really violent moments, you can kind of understand the underlying sort of feelings that the characters are going through. Jonathan, sorry, you haven't, talking of silences, you haven't had much chance to speak yet. Was this your first time seeing Hana-Bi?
This is the second of his films, but this is actually the first time I've seen this one. I saw Zaitochi, and that's the only one of his films I've seen before. But I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it, because I do remember it coming out and sort of hearing a lot about it, but somehow I never got to the cinema to see it. and so I had heard of it before, and I'd heard, of course, his name, and Takeshi Kitano's name, and I really liked it. Sort of the music is there's. Did, am I right in thinking it's slightly nostalgic? There's a sort of nostalgia, especially at these sort of landscapes of Tokyo, and there's this rather sort of nostalgic sound to it somehow. But then, these immense sort of periods where there's nothing happening. I love those still periods. Like, there's art in it, and these sort of strange flower-headed animals, and
yes, apparently. Sorry, can I just interject? Because
Yeah.
I didn't realize that that's actually Kitano's artwork. He did the artwork. Yeah,
really?
no. So I thought that was quite interesting.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, while he was convalescing from an accident, apparently he did all this artwork, and then they used it in the film. And they're quite extraordinary pieces.
That's interesting. Yeah, well, because at one stage I wrote down in my notes, "Cop, cool guy, dumb?" Question mark, because he doesn't say anything, as you say, and like Zaitochi later, where he is actually, unable to speak. Here, he just chooses not to say anything, nothing to say. And these sudden eruptions of violence and sort of comedy. It's extraordinary film. It's very different to sort of most, different to the Seawolf. I guess, I don't know. Is it different to most sort of Western films? You would think. I don't know. It just had a fairly unique perspective, perhaps. Really.
Yeah, I think quintessentially Japanese in many ways.
Yeah.
That this is a filmmaker whose work is so of its place and of its existence.
Yeah.
I first learned of Kitano after seeing Battle Royale, which he is the antagonist in that film.
Yes.
And as a teenager, that was like a incredible naughty film to see, because it wasn't even available in the States at the time. And I also know him. I don't know if you've ever seen Takeshi's Castle, which was then remade into something called Most Extreme Elimination Challenge, which was it's almost like Ninja Warrior, where there's people running obstacle courses, but they're absurdly humorous, and everybody gets knocked into mud, and it's one of the most absurd comedy shows, which is from the 80s, and Kitano is one of the hosts, and Takeshi's Challenge, it's his program. And he was known as an intense, absurd comedian. He's got a Nintendo game based on his property that has unwinnable sections that are meant to annoy the player on purpose, or where you have to sing into a microphone peripheral in order to achieve an effect. And this is somebody whose sense of humor is actively deranged, who then goes on to surprise his native population by being such an artful filmmaker. There's a film, Getting Any, which is just him making a comedy again, and he's made many more comedies since the Zatoichi period. And I got this box set, this from Korea, of every film from the beginning up until that point. So his first 10 films. That was my first region-free purchase.
Oh,
and I managed to get a player, and I watched through these films. And when I got to Hana-Bi, the comedy in it was so appealing to me. There's a scene where he aims at a young lad and shoots him, but with his hand, and says bang. And then the kid and him have this brief little mime play of oh, I got shot. And it's so adorable. And I remember watching it 7 times in a row, because you're so used to he'll pull out a gun at any second and take someone out, or kick someone on the knees, and the thugs are messing with this car, and it suddenly elides between we don't always see the violent action, and there's sudden bursts that sometimes even skip this moment, and then in the same rhythm he'll do a moment of that that's entirely for comedy's value. And I find that incredibly endearing. So as far as the score goes, which I think is sort of key here too, there's a certain composer that I grew to love afterwards that I didn't know as a teenager, because of course as a teen it was the violent Japanese movies that had my attention. But growing up and becoming nostalgic and sad myself, I became incredibly, deeply a large fan of Michel Legrand, who could have been another composer I brought up for any number of films for this project. And I have to say that there's something about his central theme, which begins like soul cello, da, 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 which I'm like, that could have been a Legrand theme. Thinking Umbrellas of Cherbourg, which begins with a lonely flute that is suddenly built into these other instruments. And if you think about that particular piece, which has its centerpiece moment in a montage of him and his wife just having a nice time, it is nostalgic, as if like there's still more fun to be had. This is a relationship that we accept without very much need of persuasion, that they deeply love each other, and that their lives begin and end together in a way. Like they have to be of a piece. And knowing that she's sick and knowing that he's on the run from the Yakuza, it's like we need to fill in our life with as much of what made our romance as beautiful as possible. And that longing for their love to be perennial and never ending has a Legrand demi nature to it that I began to appreciate this time, where I realized that some of Hisaishi's scores, I think of Totoro, My Neighbor Totoro, as being like that has certain progressions that are known as Japanese chord progressions, which is another topic for another day. This has like a European nature to it that sticks out. I think these two composers we discussed today are both composers whose scores have been performed in concert halls over and over. Hisaishi himself personally will perform. There's a wonderful performance online you can watch of him playing that theme as a piano solo for a rapt audience. And I printed the sheet music out for myself, so I'm tinkering with it and seeing if I can get a decent version of it going, because it's so wonderful. There are parts of it too that I think feel undeniably 90s. And this includes certain aspects of like harp and guitar, which to me strike my ear as potentially artificial. That there are certain instruments that kind of plink plonk in and out that could have been performed on a keyboard. The strings are so clearly organic vibration, but there are some of the instruments that, and sometimes it's the way something's recorded, but that I was questioning the authenticity, not in as a detriment, but almost as an affect. That there is like this very of its time nature to the fact that the score doesn't feel entirely organically composed. There are parts of it that are groovy too, that have like dance energy, that have a bit of a flow to them. The final cue, which comes in many times throughout the film, has like an underlying drum beat that kind of can easily get the body moving in a way that surprises me a bit. So I would love to know what the discussions were between Kitano and Hisaishi about the less elegiac and the more driving nature of some of the percussive and rhythmically propulsive cues in the film versus the ones that are more dreamy. That waltz theme, which is barely a waltz, because if a waltz is in 3/time, it's one of those pieces that occasionally, when the melody needs it to be, four beats to the bar it is. And so you get like, you can be moving with it, but then suddenly it's like the conductor has to do a different motion and then bring you back to 3 and then 2. And I could feel that, but seeing the sheet music changed my mind. Other cues in this are rhythmically clear, and you can, if you listen to the final cue, that's a very good example of that, where it's groovy and in a way that I think he usually uses, like in Sonatine, which is another wonderful score, Brother, which is a fascinating movie, which is half in English, and it co-stars Omar Epps with Kitano as the Yakuza who travels to the States. It's a wonderful movie, where Hisaishi does really well, like urban gangster coolness, which I think this film uses those cues, but sometimes in the context of parochial or again the seaside images, and it can keep the. I guess it's the thread of the Yakuza, and the coolness was always with us.
But the sea always, I think you mentioned that at the beginning, that the sea in Kitano's films always plays an important role. And it's those moments of introspection where people sit and gaze out and into those open spaces. And the music really conveys that introspective quality as well. I mean, like I said, I'm not really like a soundtrack guy, generally speaking, but this week, obviously, in getting preparation for the show and watching the film again, I've been listening to the soundtrack to the film several times, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And I've really enjoyed it, and I can see myself now going back to that score a lot, and maybe even checking out some of his other scores, because obviously I'm mainly just familiar with him through his Studio Ghibli music. And but I think some of this stuff is just really lovely and just um, helps you to kind of think and be introspective, and it brings out that quality in the film and in a listener as well. So it's really beautiful.
Terrific. It's a
Jonathan.
terrific movie. One of the bits I like was one of the silent bits I really enjoyed is this robbery that happens in almost entirely on CCTV. Of course, there's
Yes.
no microphone, and it's very grainy, and it's just brilliant.
Yes.
And another lovely scene is this sort of very sort of comedic music where they're sort of him and his wife are in a Zen temple, and sort of somehow something gets lost on the gravel of the Zen garden, and trying to retrieve this thing, which of course they're not meant to really walk on. But the music there is sort of really amusing as well. But yeah, this guy is one of the coolest protagonists in a film I've seen for yonks. Amazing. But also a sort
Yeah.
of clown.
So calm.
So
And he says so much without ever saying a word. You have those beautiful moments in all of Kitano's films where you get those
yeah,
just those static shots of just somebody standing there kind of reacting to something or not, as the case may be.
yeah.
But it somehow says a million things, even
Mm.
though nobody says anything. And you just hold these shots, and it's just wonderful. I love his film so much. What's the one where he's the uncle with the little boy who goes off
Yeah, Kikujiro.
Kukujiro? Yeah, that is just such a wonderful film as well. That I couldn't recommend highly enough. Um, but it's just terrific, and all that moment too. The kind of the the police chief who's been uh, wheelchair bound, and he becomes suicidal. But then those moments when he sends him the art supplies, and he begins to go and he looks at the flowers, and suddenly finds that inspiration, and the these very surreal paintings that are conjured up in his imagination. I'm not exactly sure you would necessarily say they're great works of art or anything, but it's highly effective the way that it sort of demonstrates this man who's been suicidal. He's attempted to kill himself, but all of a sudden you can see his rejuvenation and his imagination being sparked, and um, it's kind of this form of redemption. It's really a beautiful sort of little segment of the film, and I think the music too is just so perfectly brings that out. And I just think it's a wonderful, very moving piece of film, really.
Yes, I had to double check my source there that his attempted suicide was just before this, and I think that was the accident in question, because I believe it involved a motorcycle, and that there's it might have even been like a subconscious desire, but if you compare this, and all of the films are great, but you can compare it to Sonatine, which is sort of the film before this, about 3 films earlier, that's the most similar in a lot of ways. It's that one involves the Yakuza as the protagonists, and they're a lot less redemptive to begin with, though there is a attempt at redemption. The redemption arcs for everyone in this film manage to seem like they are much more his focus. Like you can see it's a perfect double feature. So for Jono, not having seen the earlier films, I recommend it. If you think this guy's cool, he's been cool time and time again, and I think you'll really enjoy any of the films he's in. He's got some where he's not in it,
Right.
but the ones where he is managed to be all kind of part of a piece of this. So again, it would be Violent Cop, Boiling Point, Sonatine, and then this. In that order are like a suite of like almost de-escalating violence in terms of like proportion to the runtime. It's very fascinating how he manages to like minimize that. And there's nothing quite so sweet and bittersweet as the arcs for him, his wife, and his compatriot in this film versus what you may have seen in some of the earlier ones. And the redemption for himself, I think, if you can imagine this way, even though he's playing one character, he also sees himself in the other character in a great and profound way, particularly if those are his paintings. And if those came in the wake of his accident, and they come in the wake of the accident of his suicidal compatriot in the film, the lines are very easy to draw. And I'm happy for him to have worked through as much of that as he's done, and still has gone on to make many, many more films since then. So he's summed up this. He's still going. Kitano is, and I'm happy.
Yeah, absolutely, and I hope he keeps going for a long time. Absolutely brilliant stuff. Will, I'm conscious of you're on the clock, so I'm just gonna sort of open it up to any last thoughts about Hana-Bi, or Fireworks, I should mention, as it's known in English-speaking territory. Jonathan, I'll hand over to you first. Is there any last thoughts?
No, I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to go and see his other films. I'm going to look out for that box set. I think that sounds like a good one.
Yeah, the BFI does a really lovely little box set of his films, and I think they've got a couple more of his films coming out as well. So in the UK, people should look out for that. And Will, I don't know if you could let us know about availability in the United States.
Yes, at this moment, that box set, the Korean box set I have, I've now replaced everything with Blu-rays because that set was DVDs from back in the day. Okay. But I have the Blu-ray from BFI is a 3-film set, and then that includes Sonatine. And then they also put out Brother not long ago, which I picked up. But Third Window Films has about like 6 or 7 more of these of this section. And then I think I have Sato Ichi from Imprint in Australia. But there's as I recommend anybody, just go to DVD Compare and DVD Beaver and do a little comparison check and see what's available. But I think Region B really has Kitano under the best overall circumstance. So I think I've collected that well. And if I can give one more shout out for Joe Hisaishi, when I was in London last, I went to see My Neighbor Totoro on the West End, which has become a West End production with incredible special effects, and is essentially a complete retelling of that film with all of its music performed live in English and Japanese, and sets and monsters. And I cried over and over. At the second Hisaishi's music began for Totoro, I started weeping. And the whole thing is, I mean, it might be my favorite West End show I've ever seen. And it just got extended further into next year.
They were talking about it on this radio this morning. I was listening to the Today program, which is like the sort of news thing, and they had a feature on My Neighbor Totoro. Funny enough, and how it's being extended. And
wonderful. It was originally a short Barbican run, and then it transferred to the West End. It's at the Gillian Lynn Theatre, which is a stunning theatre that I'd never been to before. And I'm the next time I'm there, probably in March, I'm going to go see it again because it is a tremendous show. I recommend go to Today Tix app. You can get like £30 tickets on the day. If you wake up at 10 a.m. and buy them. And if you want to hear his music played live, it is the entire score of that film played with an orchestra to a live performance. And it is, oh my goodness, it is a treat. So strong recommendation if you want to get your Hisaishi fix anywhere near London.
William, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you had to kind of fit us into a tight schedule because you've got another production on the go now.
Yeah, I've got an easy thing. My friend is performing in a cabaret, and I'm the music director, so I've got to head to rehearsal and play some piano and work the shows tomorrow. It's a smaller project. I promised I wouldn't take anything on for a few months, but this was a friend wanted me to help, and I really wanted to participate, and it's an easy gig, so I was going to make it work.
Brilliant.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I hope it all goes really well. And thanks for taking time out to talk to us about these great films. I really appreciate it. And we'll hope you'll come back because I'd like to look at some other film music and stuff in the future. So maybe in the new year, I'll reach out to you again and see if you've got a couple of hours that you could come and have another chat with us about something because that'd be really great.
Sure, that'd be lovely. Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, Jonathan.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
All right, and Jonathan, well, that was a great conversation, and we hope folks will go and check out these films because they're really terrific. And folks, we'll be back very soon. But of course, in the meantime, if you're pining and worrying about that you haven't heard the sound of our voice for too long, then by all means, go and check out some of our previous episodes. I would point you to our Magnificent Musicals episode, where we talk about some really classic musical films. And Jonathan, was there any episode you might like to point listeners to?
Yes. Well, you could definitely check out Compromised Classics, where we talk about the great, magnificent Ambersons and Greed as well.
That's right. Yes, if the Sea Wolf whets your appetite for classic Hollywood, those are two really great classic Hollywood films, although compromised by interfering studios, heads, execs. So that's the top of conversation there. But we would definitely urge you to go and check out those films and listen to that podcast episode. So, of course, you can find all those at our website, filmswap.uk, which is your conduit for all things Film Swap. You can find links to all our episodes and all kinds of other information. And Jonathan and I have some plans in the new year for the website. So it's definitely a place that you're going to want to bookmark. And while we're talking about bookmarking, you might want to follow or subscribe to the show because in the next few episodes, we've got some other interesting guests that will be joining us to talk about some other really interesting film-related themes. So we'll be doing some cool swaps with them. So please take care of yourself until then. And Jonathan and I will be back very soon with another film swap.
Yes.
Until then, take care.
Bye. Thanks for listening to the Film Swap podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. Binge-worthy and better with time, our past episodes are packed with deep dives, hot takes, and fascinating themes. Whether you're a long-time listener or just jumping in, there's a topic and a classic film to suit any taste. Explore the Film Swap back catalogue today. Learn more at filmswap.uk.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrill.
Oh, that's the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.